Speak, Lord, for your servants are listening. Amen. Manifestation is an epiphany word, because the season of Epiphany is the time in the church year when we look for and celebrate Jesus making plain and tangible God's presence in a new way. God made manifest in Jesus. Jesus breaking into the world, abrupting our habits, interrupting patterns of injustice and toxicity in the world and in our lives. In the mid-20th century, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. looked around him and saw God's people hurting and God's people doing nothing. He famously said, "The ultimate tragedy is not the oppression and cruelty by the bad people, but the silence over that by the good people." Dr. King called our nation, in particular the white part of our nation, out of our blindness, out of our apathy. He called our nation to live up to its ideals. And he did so in some ways we need to learn from in 2021. Having seen the violence on January 6th and having heard threats of some that could come on Wednesday, I want to focus this morning particularly on nonviolence. That's how Dr. King led systemic change, nonviolently, and he taught others to do the same. Being a violent people, we often think of nonviolence as weak or as some sort of capitulation to evil. The gospel passage we just heard has often been used to support that mistaken notion, been co-opted by various powers to actually undergird their power, not to bring liberation and freedom to beloved children of God. You heard it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist one who is an evildoer. But if anyone strikes you on the right cheek, turn the other also. And if anyone sues you for your outer garment, give your undergarment as well. And if one of the occupation troops forces you to carry his pack 1 mile, carry it for 2. This sounds disturbingly like Jesus is commanding us to be somebody's doormat. So let's have a look. The word translated resist here is anti-stenai. Anti against, stenai to stand. So stand against. In the Greek translation of the Hebrew scriptures, anti-stenai is used as a technical term for warfare. So when Jesus says, do not anti-stenai one who is evil, he's telling us not to be violent. He then gives 3 astonishingly radical protest suggestions. First, when someone strikes you on your right cheek, Jesus says to present the other one for a second go. But this is no directive to let yourself be a punching bag. I'm going to rely heavily on Methodist theologian Walter Wink here for the bulk of this sermon, because he brings a truly unique perspective on this passage, and I really want you to hear it. Dr. Wink points out that the right hand would have been the striking hand. The left was only for unclean tasks, and it couldn't be used for anything in public. So the right hand is the punching hand. Go ahead and hold up your right hand, your fist, and pretend like you're going to punch me on the side of my face. All right, just do that. Where does it hit? My left cheek. But Matthew's gospel is quite explicit. If someone hits you on your right cheek. So if you can only use your right hand and you want to hit me on my right cheek, there's only one way to do that. Backhand. The backhand isn't for injuring people. It's for humiliating people, degrading them. Masters, backhanded slaves. Husbands, backhanded wives. Romans, backhanded Jews. To backhand someone was to remind them of their place and to put them back in it. So you've just been backhanded, reminded of your lower place, humiliated. And Jesus says, now, offer your other cheek. If you can only hit me with your right hand, and I offer you my other cheek, if you're going to hit me, you have to use your fist. Dr. Wink notices that only equals use fists to fight each other. If Dr. Wink is right, then offering that other cheek is a nonviolent act of defiance, an act of claiming one's own dignity in the face of the oppressor. As though the oppressed person is saying, if you're going to hit me, fine, but you're going to do it as though I'm your equal. And when large numbers of oppressed people begin refusing to be debased and humiliated, and do it non-violently, as Jesus directs and Dr. King taught, the wheels start to fall off the cart for the oppressor. The systems that gave the oppressor power are flipped. Jesus' second example is set in the courts. A creditor has taken a poor man to court, demanding his debts be paid. Like payday loans, which turn a usurious profit on the backs of someone who has very little, the interest rates for this debtor would have been high and served to dig the person only further into a hole of ongoing debt. Deuteronomy allows the creditor to take someone's outer garment in trust for the debt to be paid. So the courts were entirely in the creditor's favor. Jesus' listeners are poor. Dr. Wink writes, they share a rankling hatred for a system that subjects them to humiliation by stripping them of their lands, their goods, and finally even their outer garments. Why then does Jesus counsel them to give up their undergarments as well? This would mean stripping off all their clothing and marching out of court stark naked. But nakedness was taboo in Judaism, and shame fell less on the naked party than on the person viewing or causing the nakedness. Dr. Wink goes on, this is guerrilla theater. Don't you love that? This is guerrilla theater. The entire system by which debtors are oppressed has been publicly unmasked and shamed. The creditor is revealed not to be a legitimate money lender, but a party to the reduction of an entire social class to landlessness and destitution. Jesus' third, deceptively radical protest example. If one of the occupying soldiers forces you to carry his pack a mile, carry it for another. This example comes from the common practice that allowed troops to press a person into service this way. The law, however, said that after 1 mile, the soldier had to take the pack back. I suppose he could grab another person and sort of shuttle things along the whole journey that way, but he could only make one person carry the pack 1 mile. In this context, then, it would have been an infraction of military code for someone to carry the pack any further. And depending on the mood of the soldier's commander that day, the soldier might get a slap on the wrist, or be fined or flogged, or be given limited rations, something like that, some punishment. So Jesus' directive to carry the pack a second mile isn't to aid or comfort the enemy, as it might appear. Jesus offers, once again, a way that the oppressed can assert their dignity and humanity in the midst of a system they cannot change. Like Jesus, Dr. King said, there was no need to wait until the whole system has changed. Rather, by acts of creative, nonviolent resistance, those systems' power can be exposed and deflated. And it's utterly brilliant. As you and I who follow Jesus look around us, we know all isn't well. We know that those systemic evil powers Paul writes of in our passage from Ephesians are alive and well in our world, in our nation, in our neighborhoods. Methodist Bishop Peter Story, who worked alongside Desmond Tutu in the struggle against apartheid, had 4 governing principles for his life. One of them was choose strategies of resistance that are consistent with the teachings of Christ. In other words, don't do anything Jesus says not to do, even in the service of fighting something bad. Don't become hateful, violent, or abusive just because that's how your enemy has acted toward you. Our gospel touches on that as well today. And Dr. King taught that. Of all the weapons against evil that Paul describes, I know the one I need most these days is the breastplate of righteousness. Oh, protect your heart with that breastplate. That in our battle against hate, whatever and however it shows up, we not become hateful. In all the resistance Dr. King led and preached, he lived this. Let no man pull you so low as to hate him. He said, hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. Protect your heart with the righteousness of God. Because the heart is where all violence begins. Give it no space in you. It doesn't accomplish what we hope it will. It's actually that eye for an eye Jesus moves us off of. As we hear in the days and weeks to come about healing in our land, I hope you and I can keep Jesus' words and practice in front of us. Jesus didn't say to make friends with the soldier or the creditor or the one punching you. There is no command from Jesus to move on and ignore the wrongs that were committed. Instead, he teaches us to expose them and the systems that give them power, not by ignoring them or by mimicking their violence, but by creatively and redemptively turning them on their heads. I wish I had 3 or 4 snappy ways for each of us to practice this week. I don't. I do invite you, though, to a shift away from a reactive stance, which only cuts down our ability to think creatively. Shift away from that reactive stance to a responsive stance. As brilliant, creative, nonviolent followers of Jesus, I'm truly curious to hear what we come up with in the days ahead. Perhaps we too can carry on the legacy of Dr. King and, as he did, live out the teachings of Jesus. Nonviolence is not for the weak. It is a manifestation of Jesus through you and me, making plain God's presence in a new way. Jesus breaking into the world, abrupting our habits, interrupting patterns of injustice and toxicity in the world and in our lives. Keep hold of that hope this week. God love you and God keep you. Amen.